Welcome, mothers and others. Today, we are so excited to bring you a panelist on climate change and what it means for Texas. We are meeting with two climate experts and energy experts as well. First, we're meeting we're going to have a conversation with both of them. So we're having conversations with Jay Kleburg, and he is a Democrat running for Texas Land Commissioner. And we're also meeting with Katie Maynard, who is the CEO and founder of Ally Energy. So welcome, Katie and Jay. So happy to have you here. There's some short little bios that I like to read about both of you really quick, just to introduce you guys to our audience. So Jay grew up in an agricultural community, born and raised in a working ranch in South Texas. Growing up, Jay developed a deep respect for the land and meaning of hard work. He learned that our individual freedoms do not negate our responsibility to one another. Those values have helped define his career as an associate director of the Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation, and also as a documentary film producer and the co-founder of the startup business Explore Ranches. Jay is running for Texas Democratic Land Commissioner, and he hopes to put the focus of the GLO back where it belongs, respecting the land, funding our children's future, and being a responsible steward for protecting public and economic health of Texas. Thank you. Welcome, Jay. And Katie has a great diverse background as well, just like Jay. So she is the founder and CEO of Ally Energy, and it is the community accelerating connections, jobs, and skills to drive equitable energy transition. Ally Energy is an inaugural member of the Greentown Labs in Houston, the top climate technology incubator in North America. So Katie has held global leadership roles in BP Shell in safety and environment during periods of financial crisis, spills, divestment, and globalization. Her corporate path drove her to entrepreneurship and helped her start up her energy company called Ally Energy. So Katie was appointed as ambassador to the United States Department of Energy in 2020 and has testified before Congress on the clean energy workforce of the future. Katie has also appeared on Hot Money, a 2021 documentary produced by Academy Award-winning director Jeff Bridges, otherwise known as The Dude, and retired NATO General Wesley Clark on the financial complexities of climate change and finance. So welcome, Katie and Jay. Let's have this conversation about Texas and global warming and climate change and all the things that we need to do to start making a plan for Texas on what we're going to do. Because currently, with the current administration, the plan doesn't seem to be very clear. So let's go right ahead and we'll just start at the top. So Jay, we'll start with you. What is your definition of climate change? Because we know it can mean different things to different people. So how do you best define climate change?
Yeah, some of it has come from actually seeing it on the ground. So I was in the southeastern Amazon back in 2003, and saw areas the size of Maryland deforested every year. And in that particular ecosystem, with transpiration, essentially the forest creates its own weather. And we saw a drop of the rainy season from 11 months a year to about 8 months a year. So I saw it on the ground there, and I thought, that's another part of the world that we won't see those kinds of changes in Texas. And what I've seen, and we've all seen with the freeze, with dealing with both flooding, and this goes back, everyone can remember floods in San Antonio and the Memorial Day floods, and then Dallas and Houston and Harvey, really with these intense freshwater storms, and then also with rising sea level and storm surge and hurricanes that we've seen 500-year hurricanes in the last 6 years. That I was out on about 100 miles off the Texas coast at Flower Gardens National Marine Sanctuary. And it's the westernmost coral reef in the Western Hemisphere. It's amazing. It was expanded by 3 times in the last 4 years. That was all started during Obama's administration to try and expand protections for this coral reef. And we were down 100 feet doing filming for a film that will come out here in the next few months about wildlife in the state of Texas called Deep in the Heart. It's very much like a Planet Earth or Our Planet for Texas. And while we were down there, I saw coral bleaching. And so I came back up to the deck, and I've seen a movie called Chasing Coral, which talks about essentially rising sea temperatures that will impact our coral reefs all over the globe. And so I asked a couple of scientists who were on deck, and then afterwards, scientists at the Hart Research Institute, are we really seeing that kind of warming in the Gulf of Mexico? And what I found that was interesting was that coral bleached because of fresh water from a major rain events back 4 or 5 years ago, and essentially pushed enough volume of fresh water because of flooding out 100 miles off the coast to decrease oxygen levels and harm coral, some of the most pristine in the Western Hemisphere, right off of our coast. And so to me, what it means is that we are losing the very things that we love about the state of Texas, that we're the #1 emitter of CO2, that we lead the nation in billion-dollar natural disasters, that we're going to see 100-degree day, doubling of 100-degree days in the state of Texas in the next 10 years. So what it means to me is that it's real, that it is here, it is at our doorstep, and we'll talk about the economic impacts of that. But what I'll finish with is the people who are most impacted by natural disasters and by climate change are normally, especially in the state of Texas, the people who can least afford it. And so we have to think about this not as this global challenge, which it is, but that it's our challenge and that it impacts Texans in a very real way.
Yeah, that's great. It's all very true. Katie?
So Katie Mehnert, really nice to be here. Thank you so much. An honor to talk with you this evening. Born and raised in Louisiana, born for storms, seen storms my entire life. Remember watching meteorologists as a child, tracking storms, being the place for refuge for grandparents that lived on the coast. We look 20 years, okay, maybe 30 some odd years into the future. Okay, so I'm 46. 40 years later, 5 years ago, when Hurricane Harvey struck my husband, my daughter, and I thought at first that we were among the lucky ones. The rising floodwaters had avoided our Houston neighborhood on the west side, and we still had power. We had Facebook. But then the Army Corps of Engineers had to do something that was unthinkable, and they released dams. We actually bought a home in a protected area, right, of West Houston, or so we thought. And so what ensued after that, you all know the story. There were several dams that were let go during that event. And I think what that speaks to is the infrastructure needs that we need to shore up. So the question is, are we going to continue to build higher walls and higher, more resilient protection, which we absolutely need? Or are we also going to look at how we can curb emissions and leverage that 2 ways, through technology and innovation, which I'm proud to say I'm a member of the oil and gas community. I'm a member of the climate tech community, looking at what these challenges are, because at the end of the day, nobody wants climate change. We don't want climate change. This is not good for, as Jay mentioned, the people that can least afford it. But climate change is also starting to impact wealth, right? It's eradicating wealth that's out there. And so at some point, the cost of inaction, right, is a huge cost. And so we all have to look at this as a challenge looking forward. And in the great state of Texas, we all know that this is a great, this is a little country in its own. Everything's better in Texas. We have a huge opportunity to address climate. For Houston, Harvey was a devastating act of nature mixed with widespread failures across all forms of government. So I say nobody got it right. But I think for many, it was also something bigger. It was a wake-up call about climate change, but in the energy capital of the world. So if anyone is going to lead economically, environmentally, and from an equity perspective, making sure that we, cover the spectrum of those impacted as well as driving jobs, it's going to be Texas.
That's great. So that actually is a great transition to the next question I want to bring up, and which is, so what will this mean to the everyday Texans? So what's it going to mean to people, and how is it going to impact them directly in different ways, depending on different parts of the state that they live in? And how is it going to impact animals in our state, the wildlife? So Jay, you want to start off with that?
Sure. And I think about it from, let's just say, the coast out, because of the General Land Office controls right now about $14 billion in natural disaster relief funds. And then also it, along with the Army Corps of Engineers, is responsible for the modeling and the planning for a $30 billion investment in the coastal spine, which is in part what we've all maybe heard about in Ike Dike, but also another $4 billion or so in investments in built and green infrastructure along the coast. And so what that means for people along the coast, if we don't invest those funds responsibly, and we don't look at modeling for the next 100 years versus the way that those plans are being based is modeling on the last 100 years, is that infrastructure will be obsolete on arrival. And that those communities, you see 25% of the GDP and roughly the same in terms of population lives on the Texas coast. We're a coastal state, even though people don't necessarily think about it that way. And so you're looking at a loss of economic opportunity, a loss of physical structures and infrastructure. And you think about all of the petrochemical plants and the communities and the ports and the military bases and hospitals and schools that are all built within 500 yards or even a few miles of the Texas coast. And all of that is at risk. So I would say for those communities, Port Arthur, the Harris County area, all the way down to Matagorda and Port O'Connor and Seadrift and Corpus and Brownsville, even, that they're going to be impacted by this, but we've got the opportunity to invest in resiliency in the state of Texas. For the rest of the state, in terms of our wildlife and our water resources and how that will impact everyday Texans, we have over allocated all of the groundwater in the state of Texas. So just think about that for a second. If everyone called their water that they have a right to, we would be out. That's for cities, that's for rural Texas, that's for our agricultural communities. And so all of those water resources need to be properly managed. And we've got a plan for growth. We've got 80% of our population that lives in cities that's dependent upon economic development and growth and access to water. And so we've got to think about what Houston and San Antonio have done to pledge zero carbon emissions by 2050. Why the state of Texas is not joining in on that pledge and leading the way in a low emission future is beyond me. And so I think that it impacts people in a very real way. We're going to see the potential of farm and ranch income decrease by 30 to 45% by 2090. That may seem like a far time period from now, but that's mega droughts. That's frequency of storms. It's lack of water and rain events spread out over time. And we've seen that it's been modeled. We've seen that even in the last 20 or 30 years. The drought of record was in 1950, and we could see another one here in the coming decades. And so for wildlife, what that means is desertification. That essentially the Trans-Pecos and the Big Bend region, that drier climate inches its way further east, and that we've got wildlife that's along the coast that's squeezed by sea level rise and by hurricanes. And so all those bays and estuaries and essentially the nurseries for the Gulf are at risk here in Texas. And so it's real. And I think, someone asked in my previous webinar about why aren't people talking about this, or why haven't we really been talking about it until what seemed like the last few years? And I think that it's what someone told me when we were going through one of the last droughts. is people don't start to care about things until their yard turns brown. And when the entire state of Texas was holed up in their homes and didn't know when the freeze, think about that. We didn't know when the freeze was going to be over. We really didn't know where we were going to get our next meal. And that's people who maybe could afford to go out or could afford to go to a friend's house. There were a lot of people who could not afford that. And so think about those things. I think that's why people are starting to pay attention and to care about this stuff. And it really does impact all of us.
It's true. Katie?
Yeah, so I'm just going to say it's from here in Houston, the fact remains clear as day that despite the fact that we're talking about climate change and storm preparation, in the time since Harvey killed, I don't know, 80 people, right? Left billions of dollars in damage. Very little has changed. However, I will say this, one of the things that I'm really proud of being a part of is, I've spent my entire career in the oil and gas industry working for majors. So in fairness, not working for local operators. And I think when you ask the question about impact, so our economy runs on carbon dioxide, okay? At the end of the day, our economy is carbon rich. We have to figure out, right, how we're going to transition to new sources. That also means jobs are going to change. It also means the secondary effect, right, of the economics are going to change. And so, look, this state was built, right, and built the modern age. Oil and gas brought us all to where we are here, right, sitting in our homes and hanging out on Zoom, right? But something's got to change. We've got to find ways to decarbonize through technology, but we also need to reduce use. And that comes down to major manufacturing, heavy industrials, the industry itself. You're seeing a lot of pressure from investors and banks saying, hey, you guys got to clean up your act. You got to do, different things. It is unfair to paint the oil and gas industry as the same. I'm here to tell you that there's part of the industry that's investing and does care and is also trying to supply current demand. And there's a part of the industry that's still in denial or being dragged along, right? They've been brought along. I think the thing that we have to absolutely do, though, is, politicians naturally want to work and win the support of leaders in powerful industries, technology, pharma, energy. So I think it's important for lawmakers on both sides to recognize the reality of today's industry, despite the stereotypes that there are a bunch of oil people making deals in a back room. There are those people, but there are those people that want to be a part of the future. They're the people that actually brought us to where we are. A lot of decisions were made 40 years ago. You always see the campaigns. Did they know? Did they know? A lot of those people are on the golf course, right? Enjoying life, right? While the next generation is taking the ball. And so where I'm going with this is we really have to think about the impact from a jobs perspective and that secondary impact. When there's an energy bust, what happens? People don't eat out, right? They don't go to restaurants. There's not as much productivity. So it's a bit of a balancing act. We absolutely have to protect our land. We have to protect our animals. We have to protect our wildlife. We also have to ask ourselves as humans, what are we doing right in order to change our behaviors as individuals, but also the industries at large. So one of the things I want to call out, Greentown Labs just got established in Houston, Texas. Jay, I would love for you to come. We just hosted Beto and we had the Undersecretary of State back in December. And we had really open dialogue between industry leaders who want to solve problems and want to help startups, scale their technologies, right? So that we can remove carbon from the atmosphere, but also be investing in other things. Energy is an enduring business. It is just like the pre-days of coal, right? We had wood and sticks and all that stuff. We've been in an energy transition for centuries, but we're starting to realize and starting to see and starting to measure and starting to see the impacts, as Jay so eloquently put, right? We're sitting in our homes. a year ago, we were freezing our butts off. We're about to freeze our butts off in the next couple of days too. And let's hope that grid's going to hold. And so I think it's important. The other thing I want to mention is I think that people need to get to grip with the reality of what energy means to them and how they contribute to the solution, right? It wasn't until the freeze that anyone kind of paid attention to, oh, like I could lose my power. Right. And if I could lose my power for a couple of days, that could be a catastrophic event. During Harvey, we didn't lose power. Our problem was water. Right. So these are going to be different scenarios and we need to be prepared for those. But I do believe we absolutely have to think about how is this going to impact everyday jobs? How is this going to impact, industry? And how is that going to, impact the economics of Texas? This is the energy capital world, but it is also the energy transition capital.
I would point everybody to as well to Katie I don't know if you've seen the Texas Climate Jobs Report,
Yep.
The AFL-CIO, and I honed in on a specific area where they talk about jobs that are going to be created just in the renewable energy sector. They talk about retrofitting and enhancing our public buildings with renewable energy. They talk about the transfer of our fleet from traditional fossil fuels to electric. But I honed in on the renewables because that's an area where the General Land Office with 13 million acres can really have an impact, both on the production side, but also on the renewable energy side, geothermal, solar panels, wind, offshore wind. And what they said was there's the availability of about 1.5 million jobs that will be created within this next few decades, the transition to renewable energy. And that's essentially insulation, it's batteries. And so talking to people in the Rio Grande Valley, or if you're in the Permian Basin or, 100 miles from the Eagle Ford about, look, we should be thinking about this as an expansive approach to energy production.
Absolutely.
We shouldn't be afraid of that. And that if you're looking to your children's future and what kind of jobs are going to be available, there'll be fossil fuels, but you should also be preparing them in our schools for these high skilled, potentially higher paying jobs in the renewable energy sector. And so I get excited talking about it because I think that people have for so long have shied away from talking about this in a more expansive, in an opportunistic way. That's good for all Texans. It's good for jobs. And there's some great stuff. I think that Texas Climate Jobs.
No, it's a great report. And to add to what you said, Jay, I love bouncing here. It's one of the other really cool things about this is I think there's a real opportunity in this state. So you guys have probably heard of, and women have heard about the Texas Railroad Commission. Okay. We don't have railroads. We have energy. And we have oil and gas. And right now, they're the agency that is supposed to regulate kind of oil and gas. I say, why don't we have the Texas Energy Commission, right? We're looking at all forms of energy as all of it matters. If you look at the state of California, those guys are going in the wrong direction, in my opinion, okay? They're phasing it all out. They're saying this doesn't matter and this is the way to go. That is a dangerous situation because when it comes to generation during the winter, when it comes to any kind of fuel source, we need it all. We just need to find a way to balance it. So I think the innovation is here. I think you're also starting to see our business-friendly environment, welcoming technology companies, welcoming, right, new people to come here. So that's why I think I just look at Texas and I go, if anybody wants to take an argument on fossils versus this versus that, it all matters. We need it all. And this is the state that's going to lead.
And the other thing is, sorry, Nancy, you want me to stop?
Oh, it's okay.
That's
You're
okay.
It's okay. It's okay. I've been pivoting. I'm like, should I ask this? Should I ask this? But I think the conversation's great. Like one of the things that I'm just really excited when I'm listening to you guys, I'm taking tons of notes because I'm thinking okay, so what should, each of you guys take turns, but what should our vision be for Texas and climate change in the future? Because one of the things that bothers me just as a regular everyday Texan who's not a politician, I'm just a mom. And, I get irritated by the fact that we don't have a vision for what energy energy is and can be. Like every single time I drive through West Texas on my way to El Paso, which is where my mom lives, of course I see all of the windmills and all like some solar farms and things like that. And we see oil and gas. I would love to have a vision for Texas where we're selling the energy across the country and we really become the leader in all of these things, where we're really helping power across the country. And I just think, like, when you think about that, it could pay for education, right? It could pay for so many other programs if we just thought about energy differently and had a true vision for what energy can be. So I just want to turn it over to both of you and just ask you, like, what is your vision for energy from your point of view?
I know we're both chomping at the bit to answer this question, so I'm going to let Katie, you go first.
Okay. I'm gonna give you 4 words: all people, all energy. Like, it all matters, man. It all matters. And here's the other cool thing: doesn't matter what party you're in. Like, there's so much freaking economic opportunity. Here's what the vision is today: status quo. And here's the problem with this status quo. And by the way, I come from the incumbent oil and gas industry, okay? And there are a lot of us out there that believe that, like, we're moving into these new technologies, carbon capture, all of it, right? Politicians are so disconnected from industry. Jay, you win. Come talk to, like, don't sit in the Capitol on the, the ivory tower, like the guys in corporate sit on the ivory tower. Like, one of the things we've been doing with Ally is trying to bring industry together with policymakers, and not with lots of lawyers in the room and legislative affairs people. Like, that world is no longer here. The world of internet and social is direct, right? Let's have some direct conversations. Let's have some hard conversations. Beto came, sat in, and he said, "Tell me more." He's willing to walk in a door where he might not get a voter, right? Because of what our perception is, right? Of who might vote for whom. But listen, right? Like, we have to sit down and listen to each other. Put all this left and right stuff behind. Sorry, I'm a huge centrist, like huge centrist. Ask me, I want to be the leader of the purple party one day, okay? Because I'm not red or blue. I'm like right there in the middle. We absolutely have to have it all. And we need to have as many voices at the table. But the disconnect between DC and between the states and between the actual industry is so ridiculous. Like, you get them in a room and they start talking and you're like, whoa, they're making sense. It would make things move faster. And I think it would jumpstart our economy. I'll shut up there and I'll hand it over to our candidate.
Amen. I like to think about things visually. And so, like, just think about the state of Texas right now, the actual outline, and realize that what we have, our greatest asset, is land. It's 174 million acres. And then think about the layers, sort of take a cross section and look at what we have been able to do with all of that. So you go down to the minerals. We are experts in extracting minerals from our soil. We have now started to attack in, I think, a good way, how do we utilize water, our groundwater, more efficiently, right? And then you get to the soil. We've led the livestock and the farming industry for the last 150 years. And then look at sun and at wind, and we have led in those 2 areas. When we put our mind to it, we are leading in these areas, right? And what we are going into over the next 20 or 30 or 40 years is, you've got to look at that asset and say, where is the future? And the future is in carbon sequestration, and it's in carbon credits, and it's how do we transition, as Katie was saying, from where we are today. It's a transition. This is not turning off the switch from where we are today and the reliance on fossil fuels and where the market is taking us. Okay. 25% of the Fortune 500 have pledged to be carbon neutral in the next 10 years. Okay. We are heading in that direction. And so what we've got we've got a huge carbon sink and 174 million acres. We also have 4 million acres of submerged lands where we've got 700 years worth of Texas industrial carbon emission storage. Okay. Just let that sink in for a second. So we go from the #1 emitter of CO2 in the nation to one who is actually putting CO2 in the ground. And then on top of that, we've got wind and solar and geothermal. I was talking to the chief scientist at Nature Conservancy. Do you know Dr. Hayhoe? She's out of Lubbock, okay? Evangelical, she's a scientist, she's in Lubbock, and she's talking about climate change, okay? And what she and I were talking about is if you just took, and this is just in theoretically, okay, so don't hold me to this, but 100 square mile area in the state of Texas, and you put solar panels on it, you could power the rest of the United States. And you could keep working lands together, of which we're losing 200,000 acres a year of. And so what we've got, and what people I think don't realize, is it's a huge opportunity. And it's not closing our eyes or putting blinders on it, saying we have got to solve this issue, because if Texas can solve the climate crisis, and we can prove how we can generate funds for our school children, how we can create an environment in which we're proud of what we are giving to them, and that we can make money in the process and lead the world in how you transition. We have the know-how to do it, and we've certainly showed that we have the gumption. We just need leadership that can take us there.
Yep, agreed. All right. So, you brought up a couple interesting things about like just carbon storage and stuff. Could you tell us a little bit more about carbon storage? Like what it is, just to explain it to some.
I can try, and then Katie, you're in the center of.
I guess, yeah, Katie.
What we're hoping will be the center of large scale carbon storage in Houston there, but I'll kick it off. So essentially, take a point source, whether that is a power plant or it's a petrochemical plant, okay, and imagine that you've got CO2 and emissions coming out of a stack, and it's on the coast. It doesn't have to be on the coast, but let's just use that as an example. That you can pipe that CO2 emission off the coastline and then down 10,000 feet into a saline layer, a salty layer, where you can permanently and safely trap that CO2 in our submerged lands off the Texas coast. They're using the similar technology, which is called tertiary recovery, in the oil and gas business. And I'll let Katie, talk about that. But you also have direct air capture. Which is happening. Occidental is doing that out in Nectar County, where you're actually taking CO2 out of the air and then using it in the oil and gas production process. And then the last thing I'll say is you have carbon sequestration. So imagine the earth and the soil as a sponge. And we now know that there's a service that soil contributes to sequestering carbon. And depending on whether it's wetlands or it's desert, it sequesters that carbon at different rates, right? Well, if you can calculate that and what the delta is between what is happening now and how much carbon is going to be sequestered in the future, then you can actually get paid for that. And we've got 95% of the state of Texas, it's privately owned. It's a way to contribute to additional revenue sources to keep our open space and working lands working. So anyway, there's a huge opportunity there. We just got to have people that are talking about it. But go ahead, Katie.
No, I mean, to add to what you said, like, so carbon capture, or you hear CCUS, it's hot. There's so much technology in this space. There are a number of startups at Greentown Labs that are addressing this. In fact, you should check out greentownlabs.com. There's a company called Sembita Factory that got seed capital funding from Oxy, who, by the way, CEO of Oxy, good friend of mine, Vicki Hollub, a woman who cares about climate, woman who had a vision and said, hey, we're going to reinvent our business, right? We're going to build the largest CCUS plant. In fact, a couple years back, she got into a bidding war with Anadarko for all that land in the Permian Basin, for Anadarko with Chevron, and the market didn't like her for it, right? But she had her eye on a big basin because there's a huge opportunity, right, to set up shop for CCUS in that region. It's one of the largest basins, I think, in the world, right? And so if you look at this is a real opportunity for operators in oil and gas to shift their businesses, to reuse and capture that carbon, to resell, right, to market it. And the other side of this is, I don't know if any of you've seen Kiss the Ground. I know Jay, I know you're big into film and documentaries, but Kiss the Ground talks about regenerative agriculture and, re-putting carbon into the ground, it blows my mind how much, and I'm not an agriculture expert, but after working, with the dude, learning more about how we can take the very things that we're producing and like putting them back into the earth. And that actually, helps farmers. It helps reduce the risk, right? So the amount of insurance we're paying right on the heartland, right? There's so many absolutely great benefits to this, but we're not talking about this. Like I'm not hearing politicians talk about this. What I hear or what I see as a business leader and even as a citizen is who's going to win. You know what I mean? It's not about the topics or the strategy. It's winning votes, right? Which is why I get a little shy about public, being in policy one day or being in the, the public light in terms of, running for office. But I will tell you, one of the things I've encouraged a lot of these companies to do is to start talking about these technologies with the public. But it gets back to a year ago, 2 years ago, none of you cared about your energy. You just used it, right? So I encourage everyday lay people, right? People who are not in the industry, get educated on this stuff. Follow people that are trustworthy, right? That have great information. Feed the mind, right? Start attending seminars, because honestly, it's truly where you get your information, right? It's how you feed, your mind with good, good sources of data. But I'm glad you brought up CCUS. It's hot, it's huge, and it's going to be a big part of the future for the oil and gas industry.
Okay, so we have a few minutes left, but I want to ask both of you guys this question before we open it up to questions from the group. How do we get just me, just Nancy talking to Katie and Jay, you guys, how do we get the politicians and how do we get the main people in oil and gas industry? How do we get these guys to listen to us? It's super important right now that they start listening to Texans. I mean, we want change. We want to look to the future. We want renewables. We want to balance both of these things. So what can we do today to reach out to the oil people, the heads of the oil and gas companies, and put some pressure on them to start having a vision for Texas that we all want to get behind and to plan ahead for all Texans? So I'll turn that over to Jay.
I can speak certainly. Again, I think visually, sorry. So
Yeah.
I think it starts with voting. If you look at the kind of elected officials that we have, not just in the state of Texas, but elsewhere, I think it's because of a lack of participation. And I know that's not necessarily all because of, we're seeing a lot of voter suppression right now, right? But I think that at the ground level, it is your vote matters. And then secondly, we elect people who are talking about this stuff in a reasonable way, that are trying to actually find solutions and not just get elected again. And I'm not just saying that, I really do believe that. Like, we have got to prove that we can elect people who are reasonable and rational and solutions-based and are thought leaders and are willing to say some of the things that we've been talking about, which are not controversial. They are not controversial. But politicians have made them so. So I would say that. And then lastly, that the General Land Office is a very good example of an agency that is responsible for things that every Texan cares about. I've said that before, but I totally believe it. And that if we can get people to just rally around things that we agree on for once, Democrat, Republican, independent, libertarian, evangelical, atheist, whatever, that loving Texas is not a political position. And so that to me is what we're trying to preach to people, that you, Nancy, and everybody else on this call, get out and vote. And that in terms of speaking to industry, I think the market in one way is taking industry, right? The consumer is telling the oil and gas industry, or really any industry, you've got to be greener, right? And if you look at the numbers, and some of this comes out of Texas 2036 and the policy work that they have done, that 20% of our public school funding is based on fossil fuels. And if you look out over the next 25 years, we are going to see more than likely a decline in those revenues of 30%. So the numbers are telling us that we have got to figure out how to diversify that revenue stream. And so I think it's looking at the facts and believing in science and modeling and rational thought and saying, how do we get these things done rather than worrying about politics and your next election?
I agree. And I will just say that the industry is listening, the part of the industry that cares. I don't know that we need to run after the people that don't care, because I think what's happening is, I do think policymakers need to think about how this is going to affect the little guy, because that's the rub. I call them my bubbas. Okay. The bubbas that have been around, that have been working in the field, that oil and gas is their way of life. So how do we help bring them right to this next space? I think that's where there's a lot of tension, right? Is we're eliminating one person. So, we're getting rid of, they're going to be losers, right? And winners, and if you look to it nationally, what we did when we were moving coal, from coal to oil and gas, we didn't exactly do a transitional or skill set transition done in the right way, right? To help, the average everyday person who was trying to make the transition. I don't think that's going to be the case here in Texas. It's like we've talked about, we have that know-how. I really think it's important, if you walk away with anything today, to understand the oil and gas industry is a part of this solution. There's no industry that can scale better than the incumbent industry. We have got to take incumbents and startups, right, and bring them together. The people who want to be left behind, the market's going to take care of them. But we're already seeing that investment. We're already seeing that cooperation. We're already seeing major moves by the bigs. So my encouragement to you is to think about, how are we going to help the smaller folks, bring them along, and how can we prepare them for the skills that are going to be needed for the future?
That's great. That's great feedback. Thank you so much for all that. I think that gives me a lot to think about as a Texan, and hopefully does everybody else who's attending. So there's a couple of questions that we have from some of our audience members. So Linda is asking, what about carbon-free and dividend plans? Anybody want to take that? A carbon fee. Okay, what about carbon fee and dividend plans? I don't have my glasses on, so it's a little fuzzy.
So are you speaking about carbon? So you're talking about carbon credits. So the proposed fees basically it's like carbon taxation, right? So we're talking about the fees that are proposed, to add to the cost of fossil fuels. Well, here's the thing. So carbon taxation and carbon fees have been another one of those, like, the industry is very big on putting a price on carbon. Kind of gets back to like the worse the food you eat, right? You look at, your energy use, like when you go to, or when your energy consumption, when you consume a piece of food, right? There's a debate with this. I mean, it's, how do you make that fair, right? Because there are people, so the bigger users should be, paying more, but how does that impact the people who need energy the most? So there's a big debate on this. I'm a proponent of carbon tax, because I'll tell you, when I did my household consumption calculation online, 2 international trips, 2 equals 1 use of KW in my household for a year. When I realized that, wow, taking an international trip twice equaled 1 year of, electric consumption in my home, it opened my eyes a bit, right? About, do I need to take those trips? Can I offset those trips? That's my feeling on carbon taxation. When you talk to the industry, they're largely for putting a carbon on or tax on carbon, because that's a way to pay for it. And at the end of the day, I'm just here to tell you, it's all going to be expensive. We're all going to have to pay for it. At some point, we got to decide on what the model is going to be economically.
Okay, so we got time for just a couple more questions. So this is from Scott, and he asked, this is about equitable transition, vision, and messaging through the election and how important it is on November 8th. So he's asking, it is so refreshing to listen to your visions, both Jay and Katie. We need other Democratic candidates to sell this transition to the future as a counter narrative to what Greg Abbott's current fear-mongering campaign is doing. Texans are, hold on a second, it moved something. Texans losing their jobs in the oil and gas shale industry. So that's how Abbott is marketing it. He's like, if you vote for Democrats, you're going to lose your job. So it's refreshing to listen to both of you, to listen to you all and see how, we need all the sources. We need a solution that includes everyone and everything. So it's really important. So a lot of people are listening to Greg Abbott and that false fear that he puts in everybody's mind. So how can Democrats become unified on a position where all sources of energy, wind, solar, nuclear, shale, all of these sources of energy matter? And how can we create a message where it doesn't scare off voters?
That is for you, Jay, because you're the candidate and I'm not.
Yeah. So Jay, what do we do here?
Yeah, maybe two simple things, although one may be more simple than the other, is talking about this in terms of an expansive approach, talking about this in terms of job creativity or job creation, talking about this as an investment in the economic and environmental resiliency of the state of Texas, right? And just protecting our own communities. In my bio, you had read that one thing that we can't forget is that our individual freedoms don't negate our responsibilities for our neighbors. And that Texans, I know, believe in that. We saw it in Harvey. I was there in the wake of Harvey in Harris County. I went to Port Arthur, I had a boat and was trying to shuttle people around. And I never asked anybody what political party they were from before they got in the boat. And that was the same. It wasn't me. Everybody that was there was just trying to help. And so I've seen the best of Texas. And I think it's about rising above all of the fear mongering and saying, look, if we get out and vote and we're able to amplify this message, and traditionally, I think with this office, for instance, the last person who ran for general land office as a Democrat raised about 1/7 of what we have. Okay. And so it's important to have the resources, human and financial, to be able to amplify this message, right? We just live in an age where we've got to reach people in a lot of different ways. It's at their doorstep, but it's also through Zoom and all of these other things. And so I think it's about talking about it in very practical terms that matter to people, that they can understand, and also that we amplify it as much as we possibly can.
That's great. We're going to just do a couple things just to kind of wind things up. But Katie, where can people find you if they want to reach you after the webinar, if they have more questions? Where can people find you at?
I'm all over social media personally. When you take on sticky topics like energy, equity in the environment, and jobs, you become a bit of a trollmonger. So you can find me on all the channels. I'm sure Jay's already got a few of those, plenty of those. That's what happens when you're out there. And then allyenergy.com. That's the platform where we're building this new future for jobs on in energy, not just here in Texas, but globally.
So do you have any end remarks for anyone as to any advice for all of us out there on what we should be doing, or what
I think the big thing is education and engagement, and really getting following the right people, right? Finding the right sources. Don't just read the headline, right? Make sure that you're balanced and you're and looking at the different approaches and having an open mind. I mean, we talk about an ally being a force for good. I really believe that everybody in the state of Texas has a huge, tremendous opportunity to be a part of this energy economy. I don't think people understand how much energy is tied to our local economy, our state economy, or the U.S. economy and the global economy. And so it's an exciting time. But I would say really find the right sources, find balanced sources, challenge your thinking, sit down with someone who's different than you to have a conversation.
Yeah, that's great. So the last question is going to be for Jay. I want to make sure to give you some little bit of extra time here just to tell us a little bit more about just about why you're running and just a little bit more just stuff about Jay and what you would like us to know. So this kind of goes in with Beth's question, and Beth is a friend of both of ours. And Beth is asking, so Jay, what are your high level points that you would like us to share with our friends and family as to why they should vote for you? And this is before sending them directly to your website. So why should we vote for you? And then just kind of give us a few reasons why, and then tell us where we can find you online.
Great. I'll do that. So I'm a husband and the father of three girls. So I kind of come at it from that perspective, 14, 9, and 4. And I'm an entrepreneur. I've been involved in building and managing 4 different businesses. So I look at things from that perspective. I got a business degree from the University of Texas at Austin. I've worked at the international and the federal and the state level on land management and conservation. And so if you look at the responsibilities of the General Land Office, 13 million acres of public lands, 9 veterans homes and 4 veteran cemeteries, a veteran loan program, natural disaster relief funds, and all of its responsibilities along the coast, that you realize that it's a job. That this is a job that is my life's work has gone into preparing for this. And I haven't had this in my sights. I just had worked at Parks and Wildlife Foundation with the General Land Office, and I'd seen them go the wrong direction in so many occasions, away from what I thought was a benefit to all Texans, a benefit to our environment, a benefit to sustainable land management, and towards profits alone, and toward the politicization of disaster relief funds, 0 to the city of Houston and Harris County in the wake of Harvey, 14 billion in backlogged disaster relief funds. Those impact real people. So what I would say to people is, understand what the General Land Office is. It's a very big job that impacts people, and it is a job. It may be an elected position, but I look at it as a job. And if you care about that and you care about all Texans, then you would want someone who's qualified for that job. And I believe that I'm one of the most qualified candidates who's run for this position in the last 20 years. And so for that reason, all that I've done the last 20 years, I know what is at stake. I don't think that we have time to waste. I really don't. And so this is not about politics. This is about our future. And so that's why I would tell them that this is an important race, and that I'm the person to get the job done, and that we've got to win in November. And I know that I can bring people together. Just like the conversation that we've had today was not political. It really wasn't. It was apolitical. We're talking about real issues that I think bring people together. And so that's what I would say. And I'll put my website here. The campaign is going well. We're going into a tough battle in the primary. And I just hope that people are informed, and I really appreciate the time to focus not just on this race, but really on a really important topic that I think some people may politicize, or they may get afraid to even talk about. But I hopefully what you all walk away from today is that we can do this, that we have a huge opportunity, and that the future is bright if we will just lead.
That's great. Thank you so much. Really quick is that a couple nights ago, I watched Jay's movie, The Wall and the Border, and I really enjoyed it, Jay. I grew up in El Paso, Texas. Well, outside of El Paso, I grew up in Las Cruces, but my mom lives in El Paso. And I grew up with a very sort of like normal relationship with the border. I mean, we were just used to walking across the border all the time. And it's, El Paso is a beautiful community. It really, really is. So I watched your movie the other night, and I didn't know if a movie was going to change me or not, but I have to admit, it really did change me It just, something about that movie just changed me deep inside, and I've been thinking about it a lot the last couple of days. So I just really want to thank you for being part of that movie, because it made me stop and think about the beauty of Big Bend and the beauty of the border of Texas, and some of the issues that we do have along the border. So I just learned a ton. My grandfather was a bracero, and
Wow.
yeah. And so he came over, and I looked up on Ancestry. I looked up his papers on Ancestry, so I could tell how many times he crossed the border to come and work in the fields in Texas. And it's really cool, because I could just relate to so much of that movie, just so much of it, that it just opened up my eyes. And that's probably going to be a topic for another time. One of these days on the campaign trail, we'll go have margaritas, and I'll tell you about my grandfather. So I can't wait to tell you about that. But
Katie's movie as well.
Yeah. And I just, so before we leave, I just want to say thank you so much to Katie Maynard and to Jay Kleburg. And it was such an honor to have you all here tonight, and just to be able to share some of your insights with climate change and how it's impacting Texans. I think it gave us a lot of food for thought and things to think about. And the thing I'm most excited about is that I think that by electing new leaders and having new visions coming out of our business, the business side and the political side, I think we could have some solutions for Texas that we could all get behind and be proud of. And it could just help Texas become the leader into the future and being the energy leader, right? So, but thank you all so much for your time tonight. I really appreciate you. And just, I guess we'll see you on the campaign trail. And Katie, I hope to meet you soon sometime.
No campaign trail here for me, not anytime soon. I'm going to watch Jay.
Yes.
And try to bust it as that entrepreneur, get as many job seekers matched with great companies, so we can drive the future for Texas. So, but congratulations, Jay. I admire you, and I admire your wife too. It's a big deal.
Yes, I owe a lot to her, and we'll be in College Station and then Houston in the next few days. So
look out, let me know, come on by. We'll have you in town and you check it out. So
okay, great.
All right.
Thanks so much. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
See you all later. Thank you, mothers and others. Good night.